Hudson in Poughkeepsie, New York. My second guest is Kathryn May, co-author with Ellen Messer of Back Rooms, Voices from the Illegal Abortion Era. She's joining us because, as most of you may or may not recall, January is the anniversary of Roe versus Wade. My third guest is Martin Rutberg, a personal injury attorney who practices in Poughkeepsie and formerly with McCabe and Mack. And he has many interesting things to say about this controversial area of the law. I hope you'll join me for the full hour, and with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Ned Sullivan. Thanks a lot for coming here today, Ned.
It's great to be here, Joanne.
Now, you are a native of Maine, is that correct? Or you lived there for many years?
Well, my family and I lived there for the last 4.5 years, where I'm actually a native of the Hudson Valley, as is my wife. So we've just recently come back.
Where are you from in the Hudson Valley?
I'm from Westchester County.
Oh, we're
born in Yonkers and then grew up in Mount Kisco.
Oh, okay, so near Shrub Oak, where I grew up.
That's right.
And Tara Roberts, who is your wife,
yes,
was a activist, very much so, on the town board and in the asbestos crisis we had in Woodstock, and I know her through that.
That's right, and ultimately a county legislator.
That's right.
Until we moved to Maine.
Now you're back and you're living in the Tivoli area, is that correct?
We live in Annandale, just south of the Bard campus, and I'm working in Poughkeepsie.
Great. Well, welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
When did you take over Scenic, Hudson?
I started my job 10 months ago.
Okay.
And immediately before that, I served as the State Environmental Commissioner for Maine.
Oh. And where were you living in Maine?
Brunswick, right on the coast. It's about 30 miles north of Portland. Beautiful town where Bowdoin College is located.
Oh,
and
right.
I worked in the state capital, which is Augusta.
Great. Well, it's cold here, but it's probably not as cold as Maine.
That's right. That's right.
But, well, I really am very interested in Scenic Hudson, of course, because aside from my divorce work and my books on divorce, I also have written 2 guidebooks to the Hudson Valley. One is called The Best of the Hudson Valley in Catskills. The other is called Let's Take the Kids, Places to Go with Children in the Hudson Valley, which you may or may not need.
I do.
But I was going to ask you what is happening that maybe you could share with the folks who are watching in the Ulster and Dutchess County areas. You know, what's new with your organization? Or I know you're very active in cleaning the river, and keeping it clean, and I'd like to talk about that too. But is there anything particularly new that we should know?
Yes, there's a lot happening, and in fact, I think we're at a very crucial time in the life of the Hudson Valley. We're at a point where there's a fork in the road, and I think it's up to the citizens of the Hudson Valley which fork of the road, which path we follow.
Didn't Pataki commission a Hudson River Institute that's going to be starting?
Well, he just announced in his State of the State address that he wants to create a Hudson Valley Institute for the research on the river and the Hudson River estuary.
Do you think that is a necessary?
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I do
think
too.
It's very exciting and is just the kind of development that I think will be positive for the Hudson Valley. But to describe the 2 forks in the road, let me say that the Hudson Valley is a beautiful area, as you know, and it's really a place with a unique quality of life. Villages like Rhinebeck that have strong town centers. People can walk from one store to another, and there's I think a really great quality of life here. But more than that, the Hudson Valley is a place with a very rich history. The American Revolution, many of the important battles of the American Revolution were fought here. There are mountaintops like the one in Beacon where fires burned to warn General Washington about the movement of troops up the Hudson. And there's the Hudson River School of Painters were based here, painted the Hudson, and so we have Owana at Frederick Church's home and studio.
And hopefully the Cole House will be opening in Catskill one of these days, but they're working on it.
Okay. So there's
Yeah.
beautiful river. The Hudson Highlands are an incredible place for local folks to hike and a real attraction to people outside of the region, and very rich history. We have just south of here the FDR corridor and so many important historic sites in the area. And there's now a movement to try to preserve and enhance those things, to protect the quality of our environment, to make those historical and natural assets the real foundation for economic growth and development in the area. And a commitment to a heritage trail that would link up all these historic sites. So that
Like Boston has.
That's right, like Boston has, so that people could come into the Hudson Valley and go from one great place to another, have hikes, take their kids to family-friendly parks and that type of thing.
Because the identity of the region, as you know, it's called an amorphous area between Manhattan and the Adirondacks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really been a problem
That's right.
for the area. When I wrote my guidebooks, I ran Hudson Valley Magazine for 5 years in the early 80s. That was one of my goals. I called up my friends in New York. I worked in publishing, and I said, you know, there's no guidebook
That's right.
that really divides it up. And I divide it by county. But even people who live here, my friends in Woodstock, they don't know where one county ends and another begins, and they live here.
That's right.
So the people who are visiting, if there was more, you know, we don't market our area the way
That's
we could.
exactly right.
There's no regional identity. A lot of the identity is by county or, like you say, township.
That's right.
Rhinebeck, Woodstock, you know, all these
That's
towns,
right.
Millbrook. But there is no grand Hudson Valley. And it would be really nice to see some unity in that respect. And if
Exactly.
your organization were more, I know the Catskill Center for Conservation and Development, Getty Svikauskas is president of that now.
Right.
He's the publisher of the Woodstock Times, for those of you who don't know, and Ulster Magazine. But he's very, very committed to these issues. But I always think of Scenic Hudson with the river,
Yeah.
but it doesn't necessarily mean the river is surrounded by land.
That's right. Well, we're committed to the river, but also to what we're calling these days smart growth in the valley, an economy that's based on protecting and sustaining these incredibly valuable resources that we have here. And we're doing a number of things in that regard. We are creating family-friendly parks on the river, like Poets Walk.
Oh, that's marvelous.
It's
In
a beautiful
Annandale.
place. That's right. It's in Red Hook. Burger Hill recently opened just outside of Rhinebeck. But we have
See, that I'm not familiar with.
we have 24 different parks, and I can give
Can you
one
give
of
us
our-
a list?
Yes, we have an adventure
Because
guide.
I'd love to put a list of those parks in my book, in my travel guide. When I'm updating it this winter. So that would be a really nice addition.
Be happy I brought you
I'd
one.
be glad to credit you and do an entry for your organization.
That's
But
great.
yeah,
And
that's
we have a
something-
website,
Mhm.
and you can go on our website. It's
What's
I
the
say it,
address?
it's-
Yeah, I would
it's
like-
www.scenichudson.org, www.scenichudson.org. And if you get on the web and on our site, you can see all the places that we've preserved in the Hudson River Valley and in the Hudson, right on the Hudson, places that you can go with your family and enjoy a picnic or a hike in view of the river more often than not.
Well, you want to make my publisher scrap all my books?
No, we want to work with you.
No, it's funny because when all that internet things started coming out with travel, I thought, well, what's going to happen to books? But people still want to have a book in the car
right.
if
That's
they're
right.
out there. You know, they can't carry, many of them, their computers with them, most people.
Right.
At least not now, you know. But yes, I'm giving web addresses and email addresses for all my sites, my restaurants, my inns, everything in the book will now have those entries in addition to phone numbers. So I'm going to have a fun winter.
That's great.
Now tell me about this DIA Center that's in Beacon. You mentioned that before we went on
Yes.
air.
Well, Beacon is a place that I think is a model of sustainable development, and how a mayor, the governor, and groups like Scenic Hudson can work together in partnership to really create some very exciting things on the river, but that will help the community as well. Scenic Hudson owns quite a bit of land in Beacon, right on the waterfront, 17 acres right on the waterfront, another parcel inland on one of the tributaries, and much of the ridge behind
really?
Fishkill Ridge, it's called, all the mountains that you can see
Mm-hmm.
right behind Beacon, Scenic Hudson has purchased. And
How do they do that?
well, we have very generous support of the Lila Wallace Reader's Digest Fund.
Digest
It's
one.
called the Wallace
Mhm.
Fund, that specifically supports our land preservation activities.
I see.
And we need support from individuals and other foundations for our other activities,
Mhm.
like on the river and working with communities. But we're very fortunate to be able to purchase land and protect it for people of the Hudson Valley with their support. But Scenic Hudson purchased land there and is in the process of developing it in part as a park, but in part as a development that will reconnect the city of Beacon with the waterfront, with the river. And as part of that, we worked with local officials to encourage a major national and international art institute to locate a 300,000 square foot gallery on the Beacon waterfront.
Right, I read
next to our
about
land.
that in the New York Times.
That's right.
Now, what is DIA? It's DIA. What does that stand for?
It's just the name of this international art institute. That it's modern art, and they're going to put a gallery there that it will be the largest gallery in the state. 300,000 square foot,
Right.
but they're putting it in an old abandoned industrial
Right.
building, and so that's what's exciting. It's showing
Well, they do that in New England. They take all these mills,
That's
these
right.
mill towns, and they turn them into,
Yeah,
art or museums. There's one in the Berkshires I have to go see because it's
That's
in
right.
Let's Take the Kids.
that's right.
But so when will this be open?
In 2001,
In the spring of 2001?
yes, probably.
Because
in
my
the
book
spring.
is coming out in the spring of 2000. That's why I'm
Well,
asking.
that'll be about the timing.
Okay.
But so that's showing how we can revitalize the city. We're working with the town on some other projects that will bring economic development, but in conjunction with kind of riverfront parks, and we're creating the park, but we're encouraging others to do new growth-oriented.
Does Pete Seeger still live in Beacon?
Yes, he does.
Because when I was in high school, I remember my sister crewed on the Clearwater, and that was all
Yes.
out of Beacon.
That's right.
And because he was there.
That's right. Yeah,
And he was
he's
really a pioneer
That's right.
in doing a lot of these river activities
Yeah.
and trying to keep the city. And the city of Beacon is not one of the wealthier towns like
No.
here in Rhinebeck.
No,
So
and we're-
it is I understand that the Howland Center and some of these other places, it begins with a G, Mount Goulian, I guess is the other place. These places, they're trying to do a lot with the city of Beacon
Yes.
in renovating and
That's right.
making it more
That's
pleasant.
the
So
kind
that's
of thing
exciting.
that's happening, yeah. If I could just mention kind of the other path that I mentioned early on, we've talked about some of the very positive and exciting things that are happening. On the other front, though, is our proposals to reindustrialize the river, to build 8 to 10 new power plants right on the banks of the river. There's a proposed major new paper plant. It's a paper recycling plant or a newsprint recycling plant, but it's really a major power plant that would be put either in Kingston or on the Saugerties
So
waterfront.
that's the Empire thing.
Empire,
I
Bessie
thought that
Court.
was ended.
It is not ended. They're still looking for a
Oh.
site right on the river. It would bring new smokestacks, major water withdrawals from the Hudson, potentially disturbing very sensitive fishing grounds or fishery habitat.
So what can we do to try to avoid having this happen?
Well, support Scenic Hudson. Scenic Hudson is working to prevent that type of project on the river because we think that there are other types of economic activities that will be good for growth, good for jobs, good for supporting families in the Hudson Valley, but won't mar the waterfront, won't create these out of proportion power plants and industrial projects that would take away our waterfront, that would block access to the river.
And
rather
to say
than
nothing of
opening
the
it up.
fumes. Somebody
That's
wrote
right.
about the fumes, the stench that the surrounding town would have to
That's
live
right.
with on a nonstop basis because these plants are open day and night.
That's right.
So anyway,
Noise,
the
lights,
noise.
the works. So we're working with a coalition of groups We're working with groups like Historic Hudson Valley, Hudson River Heritage, and other environmental groups, Clearwater Riverkeeper, and we're trying to bring people together because by working together we're stronger, we can be more effective in creating a shared vision of the Hudson Valley that has something for everybody, that's inclusive, but that doesn't send us back to the Industrial Revolution period.
Now tell me about, you had mentioned that your wife, Tara Roberts, who I know, is organizing a self-defense group for women, because we're running short on time here, but I didn't want to forget that.
Good, good.
Because I'm interested in that. As I had read about that terrible rape that occurred in Tivoli a couple of years back. I'm sure all of you in Ulster and Dutchess know about that. And every time I drive by there, I think of that, Tivoli Bays. What is she doing exactly?
Well, we live right up on the edge of Tivoli Bays, which is a beautiful state-owned park, and it's part of the Hudson River Estuary System preserves. But there were these terrible rapes there, and they're unsolved. There's still ongoing investigations to try to find the culprit, but there's been no success at it. So this is a park that should be open, that should be family-friendly, that we all should be able to walk with our kids in, and here it's under a dark cloud. Well, Tara has assumed a real leadership role, both in trying to strengthen security in that area, but also in giving women the tools to defend themselves and to avoid that kind of incident. So she organized a self-defense class that was right up here at IXL. They're about to have their second class, and it's taught by some really terrific people in the Sheriff's Department, part of the local...
So if someone wants to take the course, how would they contact her?
They should contact IXL.
That's that gym that they built.
Gym.
The new gym
That's
on
right.
Route 9G. Coming
right.
over the bridge. I always see it there.
That's right.
Never been in there, but I remember it being built. It
Yeah.
went up fast.
And,
Okay, so they have it out of there.
They're about to have their second class. The first one was a huge success. There were women, there were young girls in it, and they really experienced a sense of empowerment, a sense that they could get out of trouble and avoid trouble.
Right.
Most
I mean,
important.
I lived in Manhattan 20 years ago, and I thought that's where you needed the course. I never thought I'd move to the country and need it.
That's right. Well, it's been very exciting.
Yeah.
She's done a great
That's
job.
great.
There was a big write-up in the Poughkeepsie Journal earlier this week.
Great.
And
Well, I'll have to get together with both of you. You both
That's
have to
right.
come on here. We're both so busy, and you have a 2-year-old in addition to that.
Right.
Would you like to give the website again
Yes.
for your organization?
It's www.scenichudson.org, and you can also call us at 914-473-4440, and we have a newsletter, an annual report, and most important, an adventure guide that tells you how to access our parks on the Hudson.
Great. Well,
So,
listen, Ned, thank you so
thank you
much
very
for
much.
joining
This has
me.
been great,
And
Jen.
yeah, I hope you'll come back again.
Oh, would love
We didn't
to.
even have a chance to talk about those horrible PCBs I wanted to ask
That's
you
right.
about, but that'll wait till the spring.
Okay, I'd
when
like to
when
come
we're
back
out
and
in the
talk about
boats
that.
and we're swimming and everybody's on the river.
We're
But
working to
anyway,
clean those
yeah,
up, too.
you'll come along and talk then. Anyway, thanks again,
Thank you.
and good luck with all this.
Okay, bye-bye.
My second guest is Kathryn May, who lives in High Falls and is the co-author of Back Rooms, Voices from the Illegal Abortion Era. A landmark book was published nearly 15 years ago, and it's just interviews with the people who had illegal abortions as well as the doctors who performed them. This January is the 27-year anniversary, I believe, of Roe versus Wade. It might be 28. I think it's 27, though. 1973, January of 1973 was when Roe versus Wade was passed. For those people who are under 40 years of age, you may not remember the days when people had to fly to Puerto Rico or England to get an abortion. This has been a very interesting time for me because I see a lot of people who are younger don't remember what it was like and are very cavalier and take for granted this Supreme Court ruling. In any case, I never thought when I was 19 or 20 when this was passed, or 21, whatever I was, that 27 years later, we would still be arguing about it. But it seems like it's an issue that people are very impassioned about, and it just won't go away. Anyway, Kathryn, thank you very much for coming through the snowstorm to be here today and talk about this very, very critical issue that is of interest to men and women alike, I believe. Tell me, this is the book here. It's available in bookstores, in libraries. I remember getting it actually at a school book fair when my son was in school. Anyway, thank you. And what gave you the whole impetus to write this book or interview these women?
Ronald Reagan.
Actually, Ronald Reagan,
yeah,
yes,
we started doing the project right after Ronald Reagan came out on the White House lawn, where the demonstrators were out there waving their pictures of, fetuses and so on, and he said, yeah, go to it, and supported the so-called pro-life demonstrators who were out in front of the White House.
I like to call them anti-family.
Yes, absolutely.
Hey,
And this, like you said, this is an issue that is not going away. Last week, I heard John McCain come out and say, I'm going to support the plank in the Republican platform that says abortion should be made illegal.
Oh, everything I thought about him, I'm going to have to rethink.
Yeah, he seemed like,
I thought he was
somebody
a practical
straight
man,
shooter.
Right. Obviously not.
But not a
Barry
Republican,
Goldwater, who was a true conservative, supported choice in abortion. And very few people realize that. I mean, when I think back, Barry Goldwater would have been a better presidential candidate today than probably anyone we have out there.
Well, and Republicans, anyway.
Well, yeah, I know. I do like Mr. Bradley. He
Yes.
does seem like he'd do the job well and has some integrity. But Barry Goldwater was pro-choice. Now, what's interesting to me is how the Republican Party, why I don't know, maybe they want to lose votes of the mainstream, but how the Republican Party has shot itself in the foot on this issue, and they have consistently aligned themselves with the minority, the vocal minority, who are anti-choice. But maybe someday the historians will be able to shed light on the backrooms political deal-making that occurred to make this occur. On a local level, too.
Sense
No, it doesn't.
why reasonable people would still be arguing about this issue.
I agree.
While we were writing the book, we did some calculations at one point to figure out, if the people who say you shouldn't have an abortion, you should give this child up for adoption. And that sounds like a wonderful idea, but a number of the people we interviewed were women who had given their children up for adoption. And they were the ones who were most profoundly affected emotionally by this whole situation. So we'll get to that. But we figured at one point there were about 175,000 active anti-abortion people, anti-choice activists. And we figured if each one of them adopted enough children to make up for all these abortions they said shouldn't be done, they would each have to adopt between 3 and 5 children every year. Now, I haven't seen any of them adopting any children. They're too busy out there, demonstrating at the abortion clinics and saying things about doctors. So the idea that adoption is a viable alternative to abortion is just not the case.
Well, when I moved to Ulster County and I went to a meeting of the Ulster County Citizens for Choice, ironically, I met a woman there who was going for an abortion and had no one to go with her. So I volunteered to go. And on the trip to the doctor in Kingston, she told me that she had been a member of Right to Life. So when I drove her back, I said to her, I know this may not be the time to ask you, but I would really like to interview you and find out how your evolution occurred. And she said, I would love to do that. And a national magazine published that article. 15 years ago. She has long since left Ulster County. But she was a fascinating woman, and she had 4 children. She was a Roman Catholic, and she strongly believed against abortion until she got pregnant from her boyfriend, who she had just broken up with. And she had 4 kids, and she was a single mother, and she was working as a secretary. And she couldn't, and she was 38 years old at the time, and she just wouldn't have been able to pay the bills. And she said she went to her priest, and she went, she hemmed it on, and she finally opted to have this abortion, which was she would never ever get over for her entire life. But then again, I don't think she
would have a
either
harder time getting over.
could
if
have
she'd had
given
the child.
away the child. I think you're right. I mean, this is what comes to mind. I guess what all this shows is that life is in the gray areas. And what she said to me was most right-to-life people that she knew lived in the black and white area. Their lives
Well,
were
it's
very
silly.
neatly organized, and they never had to make such decisions, or finances weren't a problem for them, whatever. But it was very interesting to me that she came around to this, and I'm sure there are people on the other side too. In fact, we'll have Joanne Jaswinski on, who is the president of Ulster County Pro-Life Group. She's, I've had her on, I've debated her on the radio, and I've seen her before, and she also has a point of view, and I think, I should have both. But it's interesting when everybody comes to this issue from a very personal perspective, and I feel it's very hard. I'm a true conservative. I don't believe the government should legislate women's bodies. That's where I'm a libertarian or conservative. And maybe I'm more conservative than Ronald Reagan. Hey, maybe that makes me more conservative than George Bush, McCain, Reagan, I don't know. Whatever conservative means. But it means get the government out of my body and away from my personal decision-making when it comes to how many
Absolutely.
kids I have.
Well, it's not only about abortion. I mean, the issue comes down to who's going to take care of the children,
Who's going to pay the money if you can't afford to support that child?
not these organizations
No.
that are screaming to stop the women from going in to have the abortion.
I mean, they'll
They
give,
don't give any help.
they give some formula and some blankets when the
Right,
baby's
a
born.
blanket.
But that doesn't really carry them through to the age of 18, that's for sure. I have a 16-year-old and I know what he eats. But anyway, so
So the issue, there's more than one issue here. We wrote the book as a social description of an era. So it's not only about abortion. It's about relationships. It's about the way our culture deals with personal issues. So there were a number of stories that brought out things that we hadn't even thought of when we started this project. One woman talked about an experience where she had a miscarriage during the time that abortion was illegal, went to the hospital and could get no help, no medical help, because the doctors were afraid that she might have done a do-it-yourself abortion and then come to the hospital
see.
saying she wanted care. And the doctors would be prosecuted if they help a woman who has tried to have an illegal abortion. So this means heaven help you if you have a miscarriage when abortion is illegal, because you might not get medical care.
Yeah, well, heaven help you, as you know, if you want to have your tubes tied, and there's no hospital for 100 miles around where you can have it done. And we almost had that situation
Yes.
right here in Ulster and Dutchess counties,
But
where with
that's
the
an-
hospitals.
But that's a choice. If you're bleeding and you go to the hospital and you've had a miscarriage, and what happened to her was the doctor said, go home and get the fetus and prove it, show it to me.
Now, what year was this? Was this in the
This
70s?
was in the 60s.
60s.
And that's not the worst of it. Her mother was raped and brutally beaten and went to the hospital with her husband to get medical care, and she was turned away because they said, how do we know you didn't stage this to make it look like you were beaten so that you could later get an abortion? Think of it. If abortion is only legal in the case of incest or rape, anyone who's raped and goes for medical treatment is going to be accused of trying to set up an abortion. So the entire medical field would be on edge in fear of prosecution.
Well, they're also in fear of learning how to do abortions now. There are very, very few doctors who are actually able to do this very simple procedure. I've had it done twice, I know. I was married. It was legal. But both times, and I got pregnant using birth control, I might add.
That's
So
the-
all I can
generally
tell
the
you
case.
is, I was married, I was with my husbands, we went in, we went out. But I thank God when I walked out of that abortion clinic in Manhattan, that it was there and available and inexpensive. And I didn't have to fly to Puerto Rico or London to have it done.
Well,
That's
how many
right. I
people
mean-
can afford to do that?
Well,
It's
I couldn't
most
have.
often they're kids who can't raise the child, or they're, situations like yours where it just didn't make sense.
Well, Cider House Rules, the new movie, is spectacular, and it
haven't
does
seen it yet.
interweave a little story like that, and it's frightening. And this takes place in the days, what you're talking about. Now, you also interviewed, I read this book in one night, and I highly recommend it. It is riveting. But there was interviews with the doctors who perform these procedures.
Yes.
They are older men now. Many of them are retiring, and they're not able to train other people to do this because many people don't want to know how. Because
Well,
as
a
my
number of the
neighbor,
medical schools have stopped teaching it because of the trouble that they've gotten with demonstrators and threats and so on. The doctors don't want to be killed for knowing how to do an abortion. And when you hear these activists screaming about the doctors can murder this doctor, there's no recognition that these doctors were trained to help mothers give birth. That's what their job is, their main job. That's what they do for a living. Some of them also did some abortions on the side, but that was not their primary
right, and
purpose.
they were at great risk for doing it. But I do know somebody, his son is a doctor in California, and he went out there because his son's life was being threatened. He was, again, somebody with a practice of OBGYN who his life is being threatened in California. This is not, no man's land either. And this is what's going on, and there are people who are being killed. Doctors, as you know, have been killed for doing this. And like you say, this is just one thing they do in the course of many medical procedures. In any case, I don't know. It's very frustrating for someone like myself who just doesn't get it. But my feeling, as I have told Johanna, the person who's very anti-choice, I have said to her, I respect your views, and I would never stop you from following through having a child if you got pregnant tomorrow and that was your choice. Likewise, nobody is going to tell me what to do with my body, no matter what. Now,
And with your child for the next 18 years.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you don't have it to raise a child, then the child is going to suffer. And this seems to be no consideration about this. That it's really about the child.
I agree with
Who
you.
would- There's been good research to show that children who are not wanted end up suffering far more psychological distress
And abuse.
legal problems. They end up as a drain on the culture. A lot of, more jail time.
But
more
also these
welfare.
young children who are having children, they tend to very often abuse their kids, not be able to take care of their children, and it's really a cycle of, why are we doing this? But now
It
you
makes
have
no
children
sense.
yourself, right? Your children are grown, but I don't know. I have a son, and I remember when he was very young, he asked me what abortion was, and I don't want to go into all the gory details of what it is. Nobody's delighted with it as a subject, but I said to him, it really is about choosing when to have a child. And
That's
that's
all
how
it
I put
really
it to
is.
him, because I just couldn't, as a child, I didn't know quite how to, he asked me, I wanted to answer. So that's what I said. But now that I think about it, and now that he's older, isn't that really what it's about?
That's it. Yeah, it's
I mean-
choosing to have a child when you're capable of raising them well. And heaven knows there are enough people who decide to have children who are also doing a bad job of it. And once they have the child, they realize they're not equipped. So we have enough suffering already. why subject more children to this kind of torment?
I agree.
I have a quote from Erik Erikson.
Oh,
that's
a psychologist.
that I
I
think
like.
is really, yeah. He's a good man. He said, "The most deadly of all possible sins is the mutilation of a child's spirit. There can be nothing more destructive to a child's spirit than being unwanted, and there are few things more disruptive to a woman's spirit than being forced without love or need into motherhood."
Very profound. Very simple, but profound.
It's devastating to be forced to be a mother when you don't want to be.
Absolutely. Well, Kathryn, I really appreciate your coming by and, discussing this very critical issue with me. And I want to just again show you folks the book. It's available in all major bookstores. Backrooms, Voices from the Illegal Abortion Era. Powerful stories of desperation and courage, according to the New York Times Book Review. So I hope all of you will buy this book, particularly for those people under 40 who don't know what it was like when abortion was illegal. And thanks
Because,
again.
yeah.
I hope you'll come back, and maybe when the other side is here, maybe both of you can air the views there, but who knows.
I don't have much patience, I have to say.
I don't either, but
for people who
I'm
want to force their views on others.
Right,
I
but
just
I
don't have any
think
patience
it's
for it.
important maybe to have both sides at the same time sometimes, but I don't know. But I'm going to have her come and
Well,
be
I'd
here
be
too.
willing to debate it, but
I don't think it's a debate. Just to see the difference in how people view things is always interesting to me. But as long as those people don't become president.
I would like to talk with a person who is rational and reasonable about other things and still believes that abortion should be illegal.
Oh,
I mean, you see plenty of the people who are, I really think it's just an excuse to be rabidly hateful. It's like racism or like, any other of the rabid sort of hate-mongering that you see in our culture. I think this has just attracted those kinds of people.
I agree with you. But, they've become very, very powerful. They have a big funding pool. A lot of these people that you may see on the street may not appear to be upscale, but they're funded very well, and that's what's frightening to me. But, hey, it's America. Anyway, thanks a lot for coming by, and, I hope that you have a lot of success with the book.
Thanks. Thanks. And if it's not available, they can always order it.
Right. You're a psychologist. That's what you do for a
Yes.
living, right?
That's right.
Okay, well, anyway, we didn't even talk about that. Another show.
Another time.
Take care, and thanks again for coming by.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
I'd just like to mention to all of you out there who possibly have had experiences in family court, as I have, that after 1 year of writing to Joseph Trafficante, who is the Deputy Chief Administrative Judge for the courts outside of Manhattan, I finally got an answer to my letter. I don't know if it had anything to do with the fact that my last letter mentioned that I was going to be on national television discussing this. But in any case, an answer is great, no matter why it comes. And as you recall, maybe, those of you who've listened to my show before, my child support, when I went in for an increase, was reduced to $31.21 a month from a multi-millionaire. I thought this was fairly ridiculous, and I filed a complaint against the hearing examiner, Stephen Kaufman, whose judgment I hold in question. If any of you out there have had experiences with this gentleman similar to mine, we should all write them up and file them by April 3rd of this year. To quote, "Your comments pertaining to Mr. Kaufman's fitness as a family court hearing examiner will be presented to the appropriate individuals when Mr. Kaufman is eligible for redesignation," which is October of 2000. The last day for receiving such comments is April 3rd, 2000. I would like you to share your experiences by contacting me, just writing me, JOANNE Michaels, Woodstock, New York, 12498, or by writing directly to Judge Trafficante's office in Albany. I'm sorry to have to bring up such a unpleasant subject, but it is very critical for people who are sitting on the bench to be accountable for the decisions they make, both good and bad. And this happened to be, I think, a rather absurd one. And Mr. Kaufman is up for redesignation this year, and we all should come out and put forth our experiences with him. And I will keep you posted as to what happens in this regard. Thank you for your patience with this subject. I would have here with me, my last guest of the hour is Martin Rutberg, who has his own law firm, Martin Rutberg and Associates in Poughkeepsie. And he came up here to talk to us today about personal injury law, which is a very important part of the American experience and also a very controversial part of the American legal experience. Thanks for coming up here today.
This is mine.
Maybe you can tell me, for all of those folks out there who start to yell and scream about lawyers who are ambulance chasers and are putting up our insurance rates. Needless to say, I met you at a time when you were representing a young woman on my side of the river who was severely burned in a fire, and it sounded from the few things you had mentioned that she deserved, well, money wasn't going to bring back her life, but maybe you can talk a little bit to your profession.
Mm-hmm. I think the case you're referring to involved the death of a child and the burn injuries to another child, and then the mother, who you just referred to, sustained third-degree burns over 70% of her body. Is that the case that we had discussed?
Yes, and who was responsible, as you see, or how did this occur?
Well, first of all, the case is still pending.
Oh, it is
and
pending.
as a
I'm
matter
sorry,
of,
I didn't
of
realize.
responsibility, I comment little on pending cases.
Right.
Interestingly, it's not a unique case. It's based on the absence of a smoke detector in a rented home. And we have other cases that involve the same facts. The law of New York requires that a smoke detector be present in any residential premises. And in certain types of fires, it is very clear that smoke is the factor. Sometimes people die without getting burned at all. Purely the smoke is the first danger in house fires. So I actually have two cases pending now that involve that same event.
Aren't landlords required, isn't there like inspections of whatever of different premises to make sure there are working smoke detectors, or is the responsibility with the tenant to make sure that a smoke detector is functioning when they sign a lease?
The responsibility is with the landlord.
It is.
There are no inspections per se, although it's interesting you mentioned that. One of the cases that we've just referred to did involve an outside agency in a rent subsidy situation which performed an inspection prior to the tenancy beginning. So that became an issue in that particular case. But that's really an exceptional situation. I mean, just think about your own situation. When do building inspectors come around to inspect your house? And first of all, they don't generally, and they're not supposed to. And if they do come around, it isn't to see if you've got working smoke detectors. That's a personal responsibility that we all have to ourselves, our families, and our tenants. The law is there. In a tenant situation, it's consistently interpreted to place the burden on the landlord. That's why the law is there. You have multiple dwellings, big buildings. The smoke detectors might be in the hallway rather than in an individual unit. So it clearly, the responsibility clearly is with the landlord there.
I see. Now, another area that I think is very controversial and very, needless to say, always in the news, is medical malpractice. And I just want to share with you, the New York Times on their editorial page said the following. The Institute of Medicine reported this week, and this was this month, January of 2000, that between 44,000 and 98,000 hospital patients die each year because of medical mistakes, comparable says Dr. Lucian Lieb of Harvard, a co-author of the report, to having 3 jumbo jets filled with patients crash every 2 days. Now, that's pretty amazing.
It's pretty scary. As you know, my firm only represents the victims of negligence, and that does include selected cases of medical malpractice. And I use the phrase selected intentionally, okay? It is not the largest volume of our work. We're very cautious in taking them, and for good reason. Having said I only represent the victims, I really need to begin any discussion of that subject matter by pointing out what everybody really knows if they stop and think about it. Medicine is complicated. Doctors as a group are very dedicated. Hospitals are very large, complex places where a lot is going on all the time. So the potential for error in an endeavor of that complexity is great, okay? I think that in the last 20 years or so, though, there has been kind of a knee-jerk reaction on the part of the medical societies, medicine as an entity, to deny that people are being injured with the frequency that they are. And there are a lot of reasons why that occurs. Lack of information, fear of liability, pride in what one does. Physicians are very invested in their identity as physicians, and they believe with justification that they're doing good.
Well, for a long time, those doctors were never questioned.
Right.
And there was never a field of malpractice. This is all very new. I grew up in the 50s. I don't remember medical malpractice
That's true.
in the 1950s, unless it was an egregious case of real error and outrageous, case. But I don't remember that in the 50s, even the 60s. I don't remember.
It certainly existed in the law, but you're quite right. As a social phenomenon, it was much less
Why
visible.
do you think that is?
Well, I think with the passage of time, people have become more willing to use a phrase, question authority in all aspects of our lives, and that includes questioning how you've been treated by a doctor or at a hospital.
So this is a legacy of the 60s in
Well,
some
to
sense, right?
To some degree, but I don't want to place that negatively. I think
it's
a
a positive thing. Yeah.
thing. Now, you mentioned that even earlier on, one would hear of medical negligence, medical malpractice cases coming up in very egregious circumstances. I need to tell you that I feel that that should still be the standard. And it really should be the standard for all types of personal injury cases. The system is not well designed to handle minor problems. It just isn't. People that go to court with minor problems are rarely satisfied with the result. The legal phrase for it is de minimis. If somebody made a mistake, but it really didn't have a large effect, it's really not for the court system. It's part of life, okay? But when something egregious occurs, that's what the court system is there for, and the developing willingness to call it that way, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a lawyer, we're subject to legal malpractice claims, et cetera, I think is a very positive development in our culture. And we're sometimes criticized along the lines of there are more legal claims in the United States or more lawyers per capita in the United States and all that stuff than anywhere else in the world. And I kind of smile when I hear that, because as far as I'm concerned, that's what sets us ahead of the rest of the world. If you take that statement with the assumption that the system works poorly and that people get money for nothing, well, then it's a problem. But in fact, the system works quite well in the aggregate. People don't get money for nothing. That's a myth. It's a political myth. It's a myth that helps sell newspapers. I don't know who it serves, really, but it is a myth. People with bad claims usually lose. People with good claims usually win.
Do you think there should be a cap on the amount that someone gets? For instance, people get awarded like $20 million, like you say, for sometimes these medical things or some kind of, we often, like you say, read about that in the daily news because it's such an extreme example or it's the exception to the rule. But it does happen. Do you think there should be a cap on, that kind of thing? So where, the loss of a toe shouldn't be 10 million, the loss of this would be 20. I mean, I don't know how they would do it, but $20 million sometimes is a lot. Oh, the perfect case is the lady who spilled coffee, burned her legs with the coffee. She went into McDonald's, bought boiling hot tea or coffee, got in her car, put it between her legs, and when the coffee spilled on her and burned her, she sued McDonald's.
Okay,
She got millions of dollars. I personally don't think that she should have.
Okay.
Maybe she should have gotten something, but she shouldn't have gotten what she got. So that's what
You've given me a mouthful. There's a lot in there. Let me begin with the cap issue and end with the McDonald's case, which is one of the most poorly reported cases in the history of American jurisprudence, okay? First of all, caps. The idea of a cap on personal injury awards, in my opinion, is a direct threat to the very fabric of our legal system. Personal injury law is fundamentally a conservative viewpoint, not a liberal one, which people often don't think about. Conservative, in the classical sense, means don't let the government control every detail of your life. That's conservatism. The personal injury system is based on juries, citizens coming in and deciding on a case-by-case basis what their fellow citizens deserve, if anything, okay? Once you go to caps, you are essentially appointing kings. A list, the list, it's not on the list, that whole type of thing begins to enter the picture. Who is to decide what the compensation should be for a broken leg, for a lost leg, for a missing eye? And isn't that value different for a professional dancer in the case of a lost leg versus someone who does sedentary work? All I'm saying here is each case is really so different from one another that caps really are an oversimple answer to a very complex subject. Next, the McDonald's case. You used the phrase boiling coffee. I don't know if you're aware of it, but people often do. They say she went in and bought boiling coffee. She did. Coffee isn't supposed to be boiling when you buy it. A lot of people don't realize, because none of the newspapers accurately reported that story, that woman sustained instant third-degree burns requiring 7 reconstructive procedures. Vaginal reconstruction, she lost the muscles in her thighs, muscles behind her leg. What happened there, and this also wasn't reported because it was the subject of a gag agreement, there was a confidentiality agreement on the settlement, was that McDonald's for a period of 5 years was getting more claims than any fast food chain in the country for hot coffee. They were brewing their coffee 10 to 15 degrees hotter than anybody else in the country in a system where it would get brewed, and then the idea was it would cool down to a thermostatically controlled setting, which was safe. If you bought the coffee quickly after it was brewed, you were getting super hot liquid, hot enough to burn away your thigh. Now, if you spilled your morning coffee...
But who in their right mind takes it and puts it there? I mean, that was stupid.
Well,
I mean, in my estimation,
okay.
I agree with you, that was wrong, that the way they overcooked it, whatever. But at the same time, she has to take some responsibility for doing a stupid thing, too. Most people wouldn't put it there.
She did take responsibility. Okay. The jury, first of all, I think you said $20 million.
I don't know how much she got. No, I said I didn't know.
Her end award was $160,000 after the jury. And the jury,
was that medical bills included?
Included, okay.
So they paid all the medical bills and gave her $160,000 plus?
No, that's included in her total award, $160,000. The jury also assessed $450,000 in punitive damages against McDonald's. How did they come up with that number? That represents the profit that McDonald's makes on coffee every single day. Okay?
So they gave her a day's coffee
one day's coffee profits, because it turned out the board of directors of McDonald's had been divided over this issue of brewing the coffee this hot. You realize that if you brew it very hot, you get more flavor per pound? This was a profit thing that was taking place, okay? You mentioned she put it in her leg. I have to tell you, I've done that a million times. And everybody I talk to about it has
I
too.
used to,
Okay?
I don't drink coffee, but I've done it with tea or other things. But I will tell you that since that happened,
You don't.
I don't.
That's a good thing.
And every time I do it, if I'm not driving, I'm putting it there for a second and then I'm going to move it, I think about that woman.
What if she had put it on the dashboard and it had spilled? Would that have made a big difference in your mind?
No, you shouldn't put it you have to have it a drink holder.
What
in
if
my
it
estimate.
spilled while she was sipping it? I mean, we buy coffee in our cars. We're going to drink it while we're traveling. It can spill. The bottom line is...
I don't, because I have a stick shift.
Well,
I got to drive that stick. I can't drink anything, but
the
hot.
jury found that this coffee was insanely hot. It was boiling. And that's what they were addressing. The woman didn't get wealthy on the case. She had horrendous injuries.
No, I'm not.
Way worse
That's not
than
a
you
lot of
should-
money. $611,000.
Well, that's right.
It's not a lot of money for that.
And remember that the punitive element of that is supposed to send a message to the corporation. And it was really a slap on the wrist. It's how much they make on selling coffee each day. So I'm not arguing that one must agree with the case, but there was much more to it than the newspapers reported. And the jury functioned rationally. They did penalize her for what they felt was her responsibility.
right.
I think 50% they held her
Right.
accountable.
So she would have, gotten $1 million.
Yeah.
Right.
But she said, why didn't I just get a blister? Why was I in the
Right,
hospital for
right.
months?
That's true too.
It was way beyond the pale.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, this was fascinating. I got to say, I really have learned a lot about what personal injury just from you talking about this. What under the rubric of personal injury, because we're running low on time, besides medical, and I have a friend who had a dental case. What else is there? You're talking about, what do you consider the bulk of your business?
We handle cases involving all of the horrible things that can happen to someone, whether they're automobile accidents. We handle collapsed buildings, fire cases, defective roadways where the state or a county or a town is maintaining a situation that violates engineering standards. People are getting killed and maimed on the highways because of a defect. Dangerous animals, serious dog attacks. People laugh about some of this stuff. I've handled cases where children die because a dog which has bitten someone 4 and 5 times finally bites a child through the neck. Any way that people get injured, if it relates to someone being negligent, okay? You're not entitled to something just because something bad happens.
But let me ask you something, because this is one of the things that many people say. You can't get blood from a stone. My neighbor, let's say, has a dog, a pit bull, and it bites, somebody who comes to my house with their 3-year-old and it puts the 3-year-old in the hospital. Let's say the neighbor lives at the poverty line, but they have a dog. How do you sue somebody who has no money?
Sometimes
Who's responsible? Right.
Sometimes you don't. If the person has insurance, that's what the
No, what if
insurance
they
industry
don't?
is
Yeah,
there
I
for.
see what you're saying.
If they don't, they have no assets. Many cases never see the
Never
light
see
of
them.
day because, in fact, there's no way to recover. It's a lawyer's job to know what to look for and see if there's a way to recover. Sometimes there isn't, and we disappoint people, unfortunately, having to tell them sometimes what happened was terrible, but I'm sorry, you don't have a viable case. Just as physicians sometimes have to tell someone it's terminal. Lawyers, one of the functions we provide in society is that we're the first line of screening a case from the court system. We are the first ones to evaluate, does this person have a case? Is there a legal basis for it? Are the injuries serious enough? Are they telling the truth? Is there sufficient evidence? And is there a way of collecting?
Now, do you give a free consultation?
Absolutely.
So someone like myself, if something happened, I don't have that's one of the reasons I end up having to represent myself now, because I don't have the $200 an hour for these divorce attorneys.
Well, that's a
But
different
no,
area
but I'm
of
just saying, I was going to
practice.
say, but you're able to do contingency because you, unlike, I remember them explaining to me, divorce, they can't do contingency, because then the people who had deep pockets would always get the lawyers running after their case, and the people who don't.
Probably
But
true.
it's true.
Yeah.
So, but you can function by giving a free consultation and also by taking a percentage of whatever is recovered. Is that correct?
Correct. No personal injury attorney should, in my opinion, and the standard of practice certainly is, ever charge for consultation. We work on a contingency basis, in that way really providing an insurance blanket for everyone in society that no one has to pay for until they need it. Very few people could afford to pay me an hourly rate to do what I do. The average person has a car accident. They're out of work for 2 years. They have severe injuries. They're disabled permanently. I'm going to put 1,000 hours, let's say, into their case. And if my billing rate was going to be $225 an hour or something like that, who could pay?
Right.
You only pay me and attorneys like me if I recover for you.
I see.
And
So you're only going to take the cases that it makes sense for you to take.
that's also part of the screening process.
How many people do you have working in your firm?
In my new firm, which we just opened in April of '99, I have one attorney in-house with me, Elizabeth Baum, my associate. I have 2 full-time staff members, a paralegal and a legal secretary. Excuse me. We have a nurse paralegal affiliated with us who left recently on maternity leave. And sometimes the personal injury case kind of wraps around some other area of law. It may be tax law, it may be Medicare or Medicaid law, and we bring in, we call it of counsel, specialists in the necessary field to work with us on a particular case.
And where are you located? Poughkeepsie?
We're a mile north of Marist College, right on Route 9
Oh.
in Poughkeepsie.
And it's called Martin Rutberg and Associates?
Martin P. Rutberg and Associates.
Yeah. The advertising I heard worked. I remembered. Anyway, Marty, thank you for coming by to
Pleasure.
Elucidate this very arcane area that we all talk about, but most of us know nothing about. I learned something, and I hope all of you out there learned something as well.
Thank you.
Really, I enjoyed your information. I'd like to thank all of you for watching my show today, and I just wanted to mention that the show is underwritten by Swedish Solutions, specializing in Saabs and Volvos, located off the Thruway traffic circle on Route 28 in Ulster County, and also by JMB Publications, distributors of regional books on the Hudson Valley and Catskills. Thanks, and I hope to see you next week.